Good afternoon. It's a delight to see a full house. I'm just so happy that you're all here. My name is Michael Keller. I'm the university librarian. I am involved in our Baltic Studies program in the libraries, and I am delighted to be able today to introduce the ambassador and Michael McFaul. Ambassador Audra Plepute was appointed as Lithuania's ambassador to the United States of America and to the United Mexican States in 2021. Before this, she was a Lithuanian permanent representative to the United Nations, where she facilitated several negotiations, led the group of friends where she was elected to the executive bodies of UN instruments and institutions, including being elected as the president of the executive board of the United Nations Children's Fund, which we usually say is UNICEF, also in 2021. As a career diplomat for over 30 years, she has led numerous positions within the Lithuanian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, dealing with bilateral and multilateral issues, heading the European Union Department for 3 years from 2014, the Personnel Department, and International Missions and Conflict Prevention Division. She was also Lithuania's ambassador to Spain's World Tourism Organization from 2010 until 2014. She and the next person I am about to introduce will be speaking in dialogue this afternoon. Michael McFaul is the director of the Freeman Spogli Institute for International Studies, the Ken Olivier and Angela Nomalini Professor of International Studies in the Department of Political Science, and the Peter and Helen Bing Senior Fellow at the Hoover Institution. He joined the Stanford faculty in 1995. He served for 5 years in the Obama administration, first as special assistant to the president and senior director for Russian and Eurasian affairs at the National Security Council at the White House from 2009 to 2012. And then as U.S. ambassador to the Russian Federation, 2012 to 2014. That period of time in Moscow serving as our ambassador there has led to a really great book, which I recommend to all of you. It's the most recent of his 7 books. It's entitled From Cold War to Hot Peace, published in 2018 and reprinted recently. It's a great book, and I really recommend it to you. And his adventure there is a great story, but it's real. Michael, Audra, please take some seats here and join us.
So welcome to Stanford, welcome to FSI, and thank you, Mike, for your generous introduction. You and I should go on the road together when I'm advertising my book, because I have another one coming up soon. I'm ready. So what we're going to do here, I'm going to ask just a few questions, very few. We have a big audience. I can tell this audience knows a lot about Lithuania and your part of the world. So be ready with questions. And we can talk about anything, right? We're going to talk about Lithuania. We're going to start with the war. But the ambassador is ready to talk about everything except probably electoral politics in the United States of America. All right, there's one topic she doesn't want to talk about. That's that one. I'm happy to, but that's one she probably shouldn't talk about,
Exactly.
given her responsibilities. But let's start with the war. Just tell us your perspective on what is happening in Ukraine, what is happening in that part of the world, and why, for Americans, I'm not assuming everybody here is American, but why we should care and why it matters.
I would say not only Americans, for the whole world, especially Europe as well. But before going to that, I would like to thank also Mike Keller and your staff, Lizzie, for this opportunity to go back. I think it's my 3rd time to Stanford, and it's a pleasure. It's wonderful. The environment, people, the opportunity to meet. And I'm really happy and thank you for all who had it. And Mike, Ambassador, it's great to be with you. And I mean, you are such an expert on Ukraine, on and Russia especially as well. So to be here on the SEEP talk, it's
my honor. You've been
as
here
well,
before,
so that's
we've never been on the stage together.
Not together, we met or something. So because it's really topic, what's happening in Ukraine now, the Russian aggression against Ukraine, it's not only about Ukraine, or it's not about Ukraine. It's what I started is about the future security architecture of Europe, and it's also world order, global world order. Sometimes we forget that the Russian invasion not started, or war against Ukraine didn't start in 2022. There was Chechnya war in the beginning of 2000s. 2008, a war in Georgia, Russian aggression against Georgia. 2014, aggression against Ukraine, annexation of Crimea, Donbass, Lugansk, war in Ukraine, the longest war in Europe is being held in Ukraine from 2014 till today. So 2022 was a full-scale invasion. It's awful. It was hard to imagine, but we were not so much surprised.
Right.
How it came. None of the Baltics, sometimes we are saying, accusing we didn't listen to the Baltics, or we were too paranoid about Russia, something. So we knew something. That's what we were surprised about, the scale of aggression. Nobody probably imagined that in the 21st century, in the middle of Europe, one neighboring country, and we shouldn't forget the permanent member of the Security Council of the United Nations, started full-scale aggression against non-provoked aggression against its neighboring country. So is that. So it's not only about Ukraine. It's also about all our global order, our principles, the same United Nations Charter, and all international law. What is that? So that is at stake what we have in Ukraine. We saw all the military aggression. We saw crime, all the war crimes possible against civilians. We already forgetting what it was discovered when Ukrainians took over some occupied territories, Irpin, Bucha, and others, how many tortured civilians, killed children, also killed elderly, or children also brought to Russia, and families. So we got used to that. And that's bad. Ukrainians doesn't have that luxury to get used to the war, and we shouldn't forget about that. Because if we don't stop that, if we get used and we have this, we become comfortable not hearing about Ukraine because it disappeared from the first pages of that. So we will maybe sleep now easy in that, but we will get problems later on. Russia is not fighting. If they started to say that they're fighting Ukraine some years ago, they're not fighting Ukraine anymore. When you see television or Putin's, they're already fighting NATO, they're already fighting especially United States, and they don't want only to get Ukraine on board. They questioning and putting on question the whole our system, the whole order. So that's why we have to do everything possible to stop Russia in Ukraine, because if we don't stop Russia in Ukraine, so we will have, 2008, 2014, 2022, in some years, what would be next? And there are a number of countries probably would saying that they would be, and we cannot be sure if Article 5 of NATO would be also tested. So it's one thing. What's happening in Ukraine and how we support Ukraine and what red line we put to Russia, not to us. Also, the rest of the world is looking. China, Iran, and North Korea, just to name the few. And we see that those countries already working together, acting together. North Korea gave more munition to Russia than Western countries to Ukraine. So we shouldn't forget that. Iran.
That's shocking. I did not know.
It was used. Iran giving missiles. They already gave drones, I mean, which is new warfare, what we
Right.
see in Ukraine. So Russians are using Iranian drones already for years and or building their own on their Iranian. That's now very recently Iran gave missiles to Russia, even now when they might need themselves or something.
Right.
That's to be very
Right.
cynic about that.
Sure.
So all these countries, and if we are also hearing reports, I don't know how they are still confirmed or not, about North Korea sending troops to fight with Russia against Ukraine, or China facilitating dual-use goods going
Right.
to Russia, which are used already for military, and boosting even Russian economy for that. So that's we have to do. They are uniting, so we have to remain united. We did very well. It was not, I mean, Western
being the
reaction,
West and
Western,
NATO.
yes,
Uh-huh.
Western reaction, I think, was very surprised from the very start. I wouldn't say not even the day one. It started with the President Biden and raising this issue
Beforehand,
months
right.
beforehand and giving. So we were, in some extent, prepared. So it was unprecedented speed how we reacted to that, giving weapons to Ukraine, imposing sanctions on Russia. EU did as well. Did we do enough? Have we done enough? That's another question. Probably
Why don't you answer
most
that question?
probably not. We would say
Okay.
yes. So
But
we
with
are.
all joking aside, we haven't done
yes,
enough.
yes, 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 and we have to acknowledge that how difficult it is that. So we do have still really lots of resources to do. If Russia can give like $150 billion for their military, and we are struggling giving of 50 billion or something, and we are, what's Russia's economy and ours, I mean all the Western, is so we do have capacity to give more and to send a very clear message to Russia that we will not give up, we will support until the Ukrainians' victory and the victory of our as well in that sense, preserving our world order, not because if Russia is that, there might be Russian, but also China is looking with Taiwan or North Korea or Iran. So that, I think, it's also a very important would be message to everyone worldwide, if we will.
So I have lots of things I want to pull on, some specifics from that incredible paragraph or paragraphs that you just laid down about the importance. We'll get to the future and we'll get to what more can be done. But the first one I want to pull on is what you said about the possibility that this war could become bigger. And I remember I was in Vilnius with your foreign minister, Landsbergis, who, if you don't follow him on Twitter, I highly recommend following him. I think he's one of the clearest voices in talking about this war in the world today. You should feel extremely proud of him, and I hope he has a future. I don't think he does. There's election. We're going to get to elections in Lithuania if we have time, but there's some coalition politics. Maybe he should become a senior fellow here at Stanford. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. Actually, I'm not kidding. Maybe we should invite him. But he said something when I was there last in January at the SNOW meeting. You know this meeting, an incredible collection of people that your government brought. One of the most remarkable meetings. I go to a lot of meetings, a lot of conferences. I've just been to 5 in the last 14 days. That one is very special because it brings together a very small group of people from the entire region to talk about these issues. And he really caught my attention when he said something that you echoed about the possibility of this war being much bigger than just Ukraine. And you hinted at it. So help us understand that, because I got to tell you honestly, I give a lot of talks about Ukraine all over the country. And when I say that, Americans kind of look at me like, you got to be kidding me. Like, the Russians are going to invade a NATO country? And I don't feel like I can quite articulate the scenarios under which that might happen. Help us understand why the war could expand beyond the borders of Ukraine.
In some extent, they're already expanding.
Well, that's a good point.
One thing, why it's important, what I said, it's even if Ukraine, so it's not only Russia's fighting, that China, Iran, North Korea,
Right.
they are fighting
It's an
Ukraine.
international war.
International war. And in that war, what is not, it's not only using the military, developing the military, they are learning, and that is as well. So that's as well, and they are cooperating on military.
Right.
So if it's what are lessons on the field in the front in Ukraine,
Right.
so might be also applied to other regions. So we shouldn't
Great
forget
point.
about that as
Right.
well. And those countries or other countries looking how we react in Ukraine, they will draw lessons for their own interest. Everybody also is looking in Taiwan or some others. So if we will not be tough enough, so why others, or even there are so many conflicts in other regions, so why the bad guys would think that Western or we would defend others? So that would show that the only military force can be again ruler in the world, not international law, not agreements between, but just pure force, military force could rule. Another thing, what I said, Russia is not only fighting against Ukraine and not only in Ukraine. They're already saying that they are fighting NATO and against all the international law, order and checking. We see also some hybrid or even kinetic attempts in our countries.
Right.
We've been talking about Russian propaganda and disinformation already for years. How they want to influence, to disturb our societies and to put even questioning the war in Ukraine, that it's that almost Ukrainians are guilty or that.
Yes.
But
Pretty shocking stuff, right?
Yeah, but another thing as well, we see now the Russian opposition people in our countries are beaten up.
Including in Vilnius, right?
Exactly.
Yes, Leonid Volkov.
Volkov, what I meant as well. So we were tracked very
Just
easily.
to back
That's
up,
maybe I can, yeah, he was a Navalny's.
Navalny supporter who was beaten very badly. They have an office in Vilnius.
Yeah, Lithuania hosts the biggest, probably, Russian democratic opposition worldwide in the world. So, and one of them, member Navalny, chief of staff, was beaten up, and it's very clear that it was tracked to the Russian KGB, not KGB now, the military, FSB, who now, for them it's very, very cheap and very easy. During the internet or something, they can buy and ask some hooligans, some petty criminals to do some jobs, why to smash the window of some cars, or sometimes even they don't know what they're doing.
Right.
But that's how is that, or setting fires of some or factories or warehouses or something. So they're testing our red lines, how we would react, what we do, something. And we have to do. If we are not stopping, if we don't react, so that would be more than that. So I think it's...
So tell us, the debate here in the United States, I'll bet will come up in questions, and I'm happy to talk about that too. I'm not going to ask you about the debate here in the United States, but tell us a little bit about the debate within Europe and within the NATO alliance. It's, there's always this, sometimes it's said pejoratively, and sometimes it's said as a compliment, that the Baltic states, and Lithuania in particular, I would say, has had a leadership position in advocating for more support. Other countries in the alliance say that Lithuanians, they're too alarmist. We got to stay the course. And they will say from time to time, I was just in Prague last week and this came up, We can't let the more, I'm going to try to use a more neutral word here. I was an ambassador too at one time.
Okay, now you're not diplomat, so you can tell.
We can't allow the, I can't think of a good word, the more extremists in the alliance to drag us into a war with Russia. And this constant fear by some countries, including my own, including the Biden administration, about escalation. Tell us about how that debate within Europe first, and if you want to comment on Washington as well.
I will watching of our understanding of escalation. Yes. What you said, the dragging, that we don't think strong position and clear position would drag us in World War III. On the contrary.
Explain that.
Procrastinating and not doing enough and not be strong enough, that would drag us to the bigger conflict. Russians is like bullets. If you stand up on time and strong, they will listen to that. If you are putting yourself red lines and saying what you're not going to do or what you're afraid, so that would be for them invitations that just to continue what they're doing and testing their own red lines. So I think that is, so we shouldn't be afraid of our victory. We do remember when we declared independence as well.
Yes.
In 1990.
You
mentioned our Minister Landsbergis, his grandfather was the leader as well. So we received the letters as well saying, oh, why don't you withdraw the Declaration of Independence?
Because you were the first to declare independence.
And it was still Soviet Union, and Gorbachev was one of the most popular, probably, politician in those times who opened to the world or something. So what would happen, because Soviet Union would collapse, and that is open opportunity, so declare. It collapsed, and nothing happened. Then it was as well saying that, oh, what would happen with nuclear weapons or something. The Soviet Union collapsed, and what we got so many independent countries, and some of them doing very well, and some in the whole Europe as well. So we have completely, so we shouldn't be afraid of the victories. And so that's why we also have to be very tough in Ukraine to ensure that they would win.
That's a great answer. And by the way, on my long flight back from Prague just a few days ago, there's a HBO series called The Cold War and the Bomb, I believe is the name of it. I highly recommend it, especially for long flights. And there's a whole episode that features that period from 89 to 91. Landsbergis is featured there, and all of the people saying, "Don't, you hothead, Landsbergis, settle down now. We don't need." And it turns.
You extremist or something, but
and
it's turned so to be.
I shouldn't advertise HBO. I do not work for them, but I'd forgotten that history, and good that you reminded us of that. Let's talk about one more piece of history, and then at 4:30, just so everybody knows, I'm going to go to the audience because I want to give you most of the time. But there's another artifact of history that gets a lot of attention and debate here in the United States, at least, and it's about NATO expansion. You alluded to it, and we'll just keep it, broad. That there are some American politicians that actually blame us, blame the West, blame the Biden administration for provoking this war, and one of the arguments is about NATO expansion. Tell me how you and your country think about the debate about Ukraine's membership in NATO, and as you do that, why don't you help to remind us about the debate we had about your country joining NATO, in the same theme, I think, of what you just said just recently.
Oh, you dragged me now to my young years in diplomatic service. Yes, I do remember in the 1990s when some people were very small. We had like a couple of hundred people working in the ministry. So we had the same division. I was dealing with United Nations. My colleagues were with the NATO. One colleague, I was one for the United Nations, one other, and I remember coming him from. And we're already, of course, pushing for the membership in the European Union and NATO, because for us it's not only security guarantees or how they say European Union, it was prosperity, economic benefits. No, it was like coming back to the family where always belong,
right.
to the
back to Europe.
Back to Europe. and that was the path, and because of the values and that. And he came back, yes, he said, yeah, now I realize probably we will never go back to, we will not be able to join NATO because it's secure, how is Russia would react or something, many regions. So there were discussion on this line. But also another thing, what I remember, when the 2022 February, maybe 25th or 26th, was just a couple of days before, I met many Americans. They said, thanks God you are in NATO. If you were not in NATO, we don't know what would have happened and
That's
where
right.
the Russian troops would be now, whether Ukraine or some other one. So NATO is that defense alliance who was always strong and clear about its defense. And that guaranteed stability during the Cold War, and now stability for us. But NATO, to guarantee that, it needs to have really strong capabilities. We're working on that. We can also dwell quite a lot that
It's
we
one
are
of my
working.
questions.
Okay,
We're
good.
gonna get
So
to- we're gonna get to
we are
that.
good.
I have two
We
more
are
questions,
doing.
just so
We are
people know.
doing a lot. Whether enough, and but with that, so we have to strengthen alliance, because what we saw from after the end of the Cold War, many countries in Europe, and I mean even us probably, we saw that we already live in peacetime, which
Right.
would last for ages.
Yes.
So we don't need those military capabilities which we used to have, which we, this alliance used to have, and see we saw before. So we have to rebuild our military capabilities. How difficult is difficult to speak. I would like that we wouldn't need that,
Right.
but apparently with the situation that we need, and we also need the will to use them if it's needed as well. So we shouldn't forget the Cold War lessons when alliance and U.S. was ready. If Soviets would take one step, to take two or three. That is the best deterrence. Also referring to your previous questions,
Yes.
how we have to deter Russia as well. So and we think that membership of Ukraine in NATO as well would be that deterrence and defense which would guarantee not only security, stability and peace in Ukraine, but also for the rest of Europe. And we shouldn't be afraid. We shouldn't be afraid of Russia's red lines or what they say. If you remember, I mean, you would remember very well as well, what Russians say about the possible membership of Finland or Sweden in NATO. There was also remarks that, or fears at least in our case, I mean, ours in Western world, that would provoke World War III.
Right.
They became members of North Alliance, and nothing happened.
Right.
So we shouldn't be afraid. We shouldn't be afraid of our fears, and that. So they became, nothing happened. We also 2 years ago, everybody said we cannot strike, or Ukraine will never fight on Russian territory, or they will never strike Russian infrastructure on Russian territory. They do now. They do very successful. They show even Kursk. In a way, it's successful, and nothing happened.
Right.
So we shouldn't put for ourselves red line. We just really have to support in Ukraine with the military, with that, and to take the right decisions.
So 2 more questions. One about NATO readiness, and the last question I want to ask is about Taiwan and China. You hinted at it about readiness and interoperability. The Germans are now building a base in your country. That's an amazing,
Yeah.
amazing achievement.
That's big change of Europe. You asked the question about Europe,
Yeah.
and I didn't reply
Well,
to
that- well,
or
that- I wanna
something
give
like
you
that.
another-
But it's
yeah,
one
that-
of the as well the
But
signs
that's what
how it
I wanted to go
changes.
to, because on the one hand, I think we're up to 23 countries now that are at 2% of GDP. That's a great achievement. On the other hand, maybe 2%, that should be the basement, not the,
No,
not
I
the.
think soon we will say that it's not enough.
Yes,
That's,
okay.
yes,
Well,
yeah.
say a little, tell us about how that debate is going, and in particular, another piece of it that I'm interested in. You know, you have, like in Europe, you have like a dozen makers of tanks, and you haven't had the consolidation, and around here, people say that's a problem now, that we've had too much consolidation with our companies that make military equipment. But tell us a little bit about, has that debate changed as a result of this barbaric war in Ukraine? And related to that, is it too naive and idealistic to think that in the future, Ukraine could be a net provider of security, including for your country, and a net provider of weapons and drones, and could they be integrated to be a different world where everybody would be better off if we let them into NATO?
Ukrainian would be the only army who fought Russia and fought successfully, what they proved to be. Now,
right.
There was some joke. The Russian was the second strongest army in the world.
Right.
Then it became second strongest army in Ukraine.
Ukraine, yes.
And now the second strongest army in Russia. So I don't
Yes.
know how is that with the
Yes.
Kursk invasion, but yeah, but that's a jokes apart. It's unfortunately it's not so easy, and that's yes. I think this invasion of Russian invasion to Ukraine changed Europe. Not only U.S., the
Right.
global as well. That was really wake up and eye opener for many. So and putting more resources enough for defense is the big issue in Europe, and cutting interdependence from Russia, because it's not only mineral issues. It was
Right.
energy independence,
yes, of course.
economics, and understanding and situation has changed. Has it changed enough? I would argue that not yet. We are there, we are on the right track, but we are not fast enough and we are not strong enough. As you mentioned, 2%, now 23 countries. I'm already sometimes even not so good in numbers, how many countries moving,
Right.
but it's some also depending on the economic situation, whether
Yes.
they are reluctant to. So 2% is really is necessary, but it might be not enough.
Right.
Looking even to our neighbors, Lithuania, we started this year having 2.5% probably for our defense issue. We're finishing now, we are in, not even in November, in October, end of October, we're already allocating 3.2% for defense. And it's not only, and our economy is one of the fast growing in Europe. So it's not that we are this percentage because our
Right.
economy is
It's 'cause
performing,
you're growing, yeah.
but so in terms, it's much more money even. It's not even, the percentage would be even bigger if
Right.
the economy would be stable. So, and it's not only the government who takes, it's also private sector. They fund, even business people, they're seeing how to contribute to defense or the population as well. So that we introduce conscript army, we're doing purchasing, our defense industries, the big also boost for the defense industries to
Right.
see, well, even cooperating with Ukraine and some to do. So Poland, more than 4%. Probably they were already thinking about 5%. Latvians, Estonians as well, more than 3%. All the frontline countries of NATO, eastern flank, we are taking serious, very serious what's happening, because we see we don't want wars. And we see that the best thing to deter the war is to be ready.
Yes.
To fight. So we're doing everything possible. And we see also changes in the NATO alliance. We're working on regional plans, on air defense. We have to be very strong. So you're also from those countries pushing other Europeans
Yes,
to
to
put
come
more
along,
than
yes.
two alone. What we still lack, the boost for defense industries in Europe, but also in this country as well. It looks for our eyes that Ukraine needs so much, and we are purchasing, and we are now, the years we have to wait until the things we buy would be delivered is a lot. So, but still it looks for the defense industries, it's not enough demand that it would, for them to boost their production. I
Right.
think they have to do, we don't have much time. Russia now have more tanks than they before the invasion started. They have more troops than they had before the invasion started. And what they say is like 1,200 soldiers die daily, but they have huge numbers. And they would have the army, which is also, they are not stupid, they are in that sense good. They are learning their lessons. They're improving their warfare. They're improving the army, how they fight or something. So we have to be ready. We have to prepare to avoid the wars and not to have. So we have to take serious the whole alliance and also every country as well on that.
So fantastic answers. I'm going to hold my question on Taiwan and China. If there's no other questions, I'll come back to it. We have roaming microphones too, and so I'll find you when I can. Somebody over here, right in the front, got my attention first. Then over here, my only request: introduce yourself and just please ask a question. Speeches, we'll have open mic session from 5 to 6 p.m. here for anybody who wants to give a speech. But right now, I just want questions. And I'm going to be looking for students in particular. No disrespect to anybody else. I'm going to give them an advantage if I see a student who wants. But sir, maybe you're a student, I don't know, but you get the first question.
Past student. So David Markowitz, Stanford alum. So the question, just your thoughts on NATO members purchasing Russian arms and participating in this week's BRICS conference. Turkey.
Yeah. I think with this question, you already gave the answer as well. So we shouldn't forget where are our allies and where not, and what are the limits. It's not only NATO members, but we shouldn't forget what Russia did and what does. I have another example. Putin is not under the arrest order by ICC for that, but he travels to the countries members of ICC, International Criminal Court, without arrest. So we should be tough on our principles and on our values as well. And I don't even want to mention the BRICS meeting in Russia as well, and United Nations Secretary General also traveling to that meeting.
It was quite surprising to me, yes.
I was, yeah, and I know Antonio Guterres, he's very nice and kind man, something, but yes, so I think it's...
Okay, right here. And then right behind you, I see a student who's going to ask the next question.
Thank you very much. You both mentioned the BRICS conference.
Can you introduce yourself to the
Oh,
ambassador?
I'm sorry. David Jensen, I've taken a course from you. So yesterday, Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin gave a very stirring speech in Kyiv, pronouncing a lot of details for U.S. support. But on the other hand, the war seems to have degraded into one of armies, and the front line is shifting. What if President Zelensky were to say to the Latvians and the Lithuanians and the Estonians, I need help on the ground. I need troops. It's not just about weapons. That's my question.
Okay. But I would say that it's also very much about weapons as well. That's one is first of all, I think we have to talk about the weapons. How much Russia allocates finances for this war? They're allocating about 150 billions for this war. And the economy is going, and I said also how many countries support them. Ukrainians are willing to fight. They're tired, probably. I mean, they have, each family has somebody who lost already on front lines, and we know also in Lithuania there are lots of refugees, mostly women and children there, because men are fighting on front lines. Some already dead, but they eager to return something. Till they are fighting, we have to submit some weapons. We are struggling about 50 billion or 20. Why not? Even during the COVID, I do remember, or EU or something, we spoke about trillions already for supporting our societies. Why we cannot give to Ukraine? We have still lots of resources to support them. We just looked, the biggest supporter to Ukraine is still United States. On all terms, they're like supporting $57 billion gave to Ukraine. The second place by the total number is Nordic Baltic region, 8 countries, one of the smallest countries in the European Union. We gave 16 billion. Then goes Germany, 11, UK, 9, Netherlands, 5. But looking per capita, our region, Nordic Baltic, they gave almost $500, I think it's euros, by the way, it's not even dollars, per capita. 485 euros per capita to Ukraine during this, since 2022. US, the second, is 171. I don't say it's a little bit per capita is that. So if all the countries would give Ukraine, that would make a big difference. And also no restriction to use that weapons. I think that would make as well. So it's not even now about that. The Ukrainians are still fighting. They still have a war. It's one of the best nations to fight, but
Great.
to give.
Right here.
Well, thank you so much for coming here, first of all. My name is Anna. I'm a junior here at Stanford. I'm originally from Belarus, so I got to spend a lot of time in Lithuania in my childhood. And I also want to briefly thank you for hosting the Belarusian opposition in exile in Lithuania.
Right.
And my question is regarding security issues from Russia. So we saw for the recent days how Russia tried to make an intervention into elections in Moldova. And so how do you think Lithuania would approach security measures from such situations that can happen from Russia's side?
You mean election interference?
Yeah, election-wise.
We have to, that's one of the real, we have to be vigilant and to know that they're doing those issues. And Moldova is the how, I wouldn't say the best example, I hope, but it's one of those, how to see how they operate. And we shouldn't underestimate Russia. You know that very well. They're very wise, they're very professional, and they're using all the possible means of hybrid attacks and that. So whether interference into election, bribing some political parties,
Right.
or sometimes even invest some criminals or hooligans on our streets as well. So, and just to disturb, wishing unrest within societies. So we have to see what is that in Lithuania, for instance. We have some kind of ELF movement. They were big in the digital domain.
Yeah.
So they are counter Russian trolls who are disseminating disinformation. So if they track that there is some information is really like propaganda, So they gather and they counter that. So there also should come sometimes even from the society resistance, but we have to educate our people, our population, even children as well, to be very critical about what kind of information they have, and of course on Moldova something to sometimes prevent money laundering, or there are some also measures which we know already what we've been doing, especially in some countries which are neighboring and where they can easily set.
So over here, one more student, and I'm neglecting this side, so I apologize. I'm going to sit more like this. Somebody over here will get the next question, but please.
Hi, Ambassador. Thank you so much for coming to Stanford. I'm Max. I'm a current senior at Stanford. So unfortunately, Professor McFall, I'm going to take your China question.
Oh, good. Take it.
I'm very curious about Lithuania's perspective on China as the Ukraine war progresses, given the PRC declaring a quote-unquote no-limits partnership with Russia, recognizing that Lithuania left the China CEEC organization and a Taiwanese representative office was established in Lithuania a couple years ago. How does the government of Lithuania view China vis-a-vis its role in the war in Ukraine as well as in other geopolitical issues?
Okay, thank you. I think I already, in some extent, a bit answered that. I think China is very clearly choose its sides. In the beginning, some years ago, they were still thinking what China's role could be, whether they can be that country which can interfere and to have influence on Russia. But now, and looking back, what was just before the invasion, or what about the Putin's and Xi meetings, and how they behave, they took very clear side. And we shouldn't forget about that. We should be very clear. So we shouldn't put any hopes, I think, on China that would be part of solution. We should see how we can prevent. We see that how many dual usage goods going to Russia via China. It's one of the clearest. So the tightening sanction on that would be very useful and very good. Also, what I also mentioned, I think China is looking what our reaction to Russia in Ukraine, that they would be drawing their own conclusions for their attitudes in Taiwan and South Sea. So I think it's so much, unfortunately, interconnected. So we have to be very tough. And I mean, about Lithuania, so we were already some years back, we didn't have, I think we were more realistic about that. That's why we dropped from the 17+1 format, which we think it's more for the dividing European Union, if you want to have that. And we wanted to just diversify our foreign policy and economics, opening embassies in the region, in the Pacific region, including Taiwan. And that was what kind of retaliation we got from China, which just not only had to force to close or withdraw our diplomats, but it also from one day to another, Lithuanian name was deleted from the custom registration, so our goods couldn't run. But to be very frank, from that bad experience, I think we left stronger, and now we showed as well that we can, in some extent, also independent, and we strengthen much more our relations with all the other Indo-Pacific partners and unprecedented relations.
So the short-term costs were actually long-term were more beneficial.
More beneficial, exactly. So, yeah.
Wow, that sounds like a great honors thesis to write at Stanford about the way that sanctions can backfire. But I've neglected this side, so back over here. I apologize, and then I'm going to make it up. The next question will go here.
Thank you. I'm Danny. I'm a master's student at the Center for Russian and East European Eurasian Studies. I was wondering if experience on the Ukrainian battlefield has changed either Lithuanian or NATO defense planning and defense strategy for any future hypothetical conflict.
First, yes. I mean, it's also showed as I started, especially the last invasion, when it's that conventional forces are used and what kind of resources Russia has. If you remember 2 years ago, everybody expected that Russia would get tired and would lose and the people would be against the war or economy would collapse. Nothing of that happened. The economy is now war economy. Even some country or some small towns and people benefit from that. From the people haven't got tired. They're just more, I would say, chauvinistic, imperialistic, more supporting Putin and this war. So it's not Putin's war, which we try to say in the first months of invasion.
Right.
Trying to convince us that it's Russian population. So it's Russians' war. It's very clear. So we have to have that in mind, calculating what we need for our deterrence. And I'm not so much military expert, but I also was hearing. I mean, now we became all the. Everybody was joking that
everybody's an expert now. Yeah.
Lithuanians are experts in basketball. Then we became everyone experts in epidemiology or COVID, or we just got the medical degrees, and now we are military experts as well. So
we have them here too. Yes.
I think so. Yes, it's common. At least something we have in common. Something. So yes, we see as well the lessons learned from Ukraine war. Definitely there are. Using of drones, not only what kind of military equipment, even now we are having lots of, we just hosted last week some Lithuanian companies of defense industry, which is booming, not booming, but they are having new and drones, some high-tech solutions, they're already there. So that's, and sometimes you also see that we need something focus on quantity, not only quality. Russians don't have quality, but with the quantity, they're also gaining a lot. So,
well, great. Next question here. Yeah, please. Coming behind you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your talk. My name is Sofia. I'm from Ukraine, and I'm a master's student here. And I just had a question, because we've heard a lot that maybe Russia was betting the fact that Europe, or that it's weak times in the West, that bet on Europe being weak with no united front or united leadership on international law, which unfortunately I think we saw might be the case. And I was wondering, on the broader level, is there still a way to reverse this, to make our international institutions stronger, and to fix the system that we built for peace?
That's a hard question.
yeah, very
While
difficult.
you're thinking about it, Sophia, just so you know, I do a lot of talking, but I had one of the best, for me, because you just mentioned basketball. On Sunday, I gave a talk to the Golden State Warriors. Interactive, just like this. Steve Kerr was the host. And one of the players asked exactly your question.
So why don't you reply?
And I didn't have an answer. That's why I wanted to say it's such
I thought I would be safe now by him.
No, but it was just such a, well, where is the UN Security Council? It was just such a straightforward question, and I had no answer. So now I'm done stalling. Now you have to give us an answer.
Good. And I mean, you touch probably the nerve. I'm a big supporter of the United Nations. But as I'm joking, it's my first love. My first as a young diplomat was a posting in the United Nations, 1999, 2002. And we remember United Nations, how Lithuania joined United Nations. United Nations thought that it's the peace institution, and somehow it's important, is the forum to be there. And now it was before coming to Washington. I came from New York to be from the United Nations and working in UNICEF, as mentioned. And so, yeah, it would be very difficult for the United Nations to change, but it should be. But first, I think we have to prove that United Nations principles are working, and we have to defend them. And we are defending now then in the front lines of Ukraine. Unfortunately, having China, Russia at the Security Council permanent members, we cannot do a lot there. But if you win in Ukraine, so we will have a big impetus for that.
Well, Ambassador, I want to say something about my time in government and my time as a researcher about NATO expansion. You'll remember Ron Asmus. He was a close friend of mine.
I knew him very well as well.
Yes, you were involved in those conversations. And from the very beginning of the independence, the new independence of your country, Lithuania, in my view, has always had a much bigger role in the world for fighting for peace and security, but also democracy. Your country has been a leader. You have a reputation. The ambassador, the Lithuanian ambassador to the United States of America is a long, prestigious list of people. They always had way more weight and firepower. Some of your colleagues were jealous of you for this, but you have created this in the world. And what you've also done vis-a-vis Asia and what your country very courageously did when nobody else would do it. And I just think you have demonstrated for us this incredible role that your country plays, but the incredible role that your diplomats have played. And it is really an honor to host you here at Stanford. So thanks for coming.